Hi, Jenny. We're here for another astrobiography today.
Hi, Laurie. Looking
Who do you
forward to
want
it.
to talk about? Who do you want to talk about?
We're going to talk about Temple Grandin today.
Okay, Temple Grandin was born in 1947. What do we know about her?
Well, we know that she had a big impact, interestingly enough, in the, well, I was going to say the slaughtering industry, but it kind of is. It was about how she really got involved in how to humanely treat animals as we were using them for meat. So how to calm them down before they were entering the terrifying slaughterhouse. So that's kind of what she started in. And now she is an educator or professor at Colorado State University. So now I think her focus is more teaching and has a lot of great things to say about helping children with autism. So that's a kind of a short version.
Yeah. She's a fascinating, fascinating woman. And there is a movie, I think it's on Netflix, called Temple Grandin.
That's
Is
right.
That's right. Yeah. And then if you don't have Netflix or don't want to sit through a whole documentary, but want some information on her, there's a ton of information out there. She did a really good TED Talk. There's just videos of her on YouTube. Last night, I watched a movie. I got it on Amazon Prime. It's called Dr. Temple Grandin, Autism, Calling All Minds. And it's fascinating. She is fascinating. She clearly is autistic. She has a lot of information to teach us about what it is to have a mind that works differently than what we traditionally expect people's minds to work. She's fascinating.
Yeah, if you haven't had a chance to watch the movie it was made in 2012 starring Claire Danes, it's a really good representation of her life, and she mentions it in a couple of her other YouTube things, and she's clearly delighted to have her life reproduced that way, so it's pretty cool. Yeah,
Absolutely. Okay, anything else we want to say before we open the chart?
No, let's bust into her chart.
Okay, let's look at her chart. She's got an interesting one.
She does. So here we go.
Here we go.
And again, when we're doing these charts, we're hoping to share a little bit about how to break down a chart. So this is an opportunity to really learn how to use astrology. So that is what we will aim to do.
Yeah, and one of the things that I learned a long time ago is how much you can learn about astrology with a chart in one hand and a documentary on your screen and just watching how it plays out. And it's a magical way to learn, I think. So the first thing I see when I look at this chart is, oh my goodness, this is definitely a southern emphasis chart. All of the planets, other than the moon, and we'll have something to say about that, I'm sure, but all of the planets other than that moon are above the horizon. So autism or not, this woman had work to do in the world. She couldn't just sit home and she had work to do in the world.
Yeah, the southern emphasis definitely brings a person who has to confront the world and has to be in the world and not just, as you just said, not be home by herself.
And I want to say one thing about that, because I know some of you watching this are really new to this study and to this understanding. And when you look at this, and we're seeing all the planets are above the horizon here, and I'm saying it's a southern chart, that might confuse you, because if you're thinking of a map, it's, south is down below and north is up above. But what you've got to understand is when you're looking at a map, you're up here looking down. When you're looking at a chart, you're down here looking up. So everything's exactly reversed as far as the directions go. The bottom of the chart is the northern, the top of the chart is the southern, this side over here is east, and this side over here is west. So that's an important thing to know when you look at a chart.
Yeah, that's a great explanation.
Yeah, it's an important thing to pay attention to. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I love that, just thinking of it as laying on the ground. And I often think that when I look at a chart now, the whole idea of, is it a day chart or is it a night chart? I love to think about, okay, so when this person was born, carry them out and lay them out on a blanket in the ground. And what are they going to see? Well, when she was born, it was certainly broad daylight. She
Mhm.
was born
Mhm.
clearly in late September, in the middle of the day. Yeah,
Mhm.
but not
Yeah. So you can
not
really
not the
see,
full moon yet. She was born in a gibbous moon, wasn't she?
yeah, it's a gibbous moon. But yeah, what's cool about this is the thing that kind of draws your eye is the sun is at the top of the chart. And that's what Lori's talking about. She was born, broad daylight, 2:30 in the afternoon, and late August time. So that sun is right there at the top of the chart. Yeah, she was born during a gibbous moon. So that means that the moon was not quite full. It was waxing towards full, but it was, so if the moon is not visible because it's daylight in this chart, so she wouldn't have seen that, but it was growing in light. So that suggests somebody who's here to, I always think of just kind of like working on projects that maybe were started by someone else, or here to perfect or alter something that is already kind of in existence. And that is true for what she was doing. I mean, she was changing systems that were not working and making them work, basically.
Yeah, I
So,
think of the gibbous moon as also, I think of it as the seeker. People who
mm,
are born at the gibbous moon are, if you think of it in terms of the plant cycle, I think of peony getting ready to open. Those big fat buds of a peony and
yeah,
it's getting
awesome.
ready to open. It's like the person's life is just about to open.
Mm,
It's an interesting way to think about that. So
yeah, that's cool.
when we look at these charts of famous people, clearly how we are going to know them is going to have something to do with what's above the horizon, the midheaven, which suggests the career or the reputation. She's got the midheaven is in Libra, conjunct Neptune. We didn't talk about that at all when we were talking about this chart earlier. We didn't even talk about the fact that Neptune is there. But
Hmm.
that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Neptune being a part of the career. How would you think of that, Jennie?
Hmm. Well, I think Neptune brings in the idea of like what was imagined before it came into being. So it brings in the imagination, it brings in maybe a dream or an idea of way things could be, something different, but something that isn't made into form. And what you're going to think about later is, okay, so she's got this dreamer aspect as her career, but how much can this person bring something into form? And what is cool, and I'll say this briefly, is that because with all that Virgo, she's going to be able to bring something into form. There's other elements that suggest that as well, but just in the simplest terms. But this is somebody who can think big about ways to change things on a bigger level, or just imagining something it can be completely
Imagining.
different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
imagine. I think of that when I see that Neptune, and I hadn't really thought about this before, but I see that, and she talks a lot about how her mind works and how she sees. Her mind is very, very visual, and I see
Mm-hmm.
that Neptune conjunct her midheaven, and I think about an image of her down on her hands and knees going through corrals to understand the mind of the cows. And I think, oh my God, that's Neptune, trying to meld the mind with the cattle to learn how to keep them calm as they were being brought to slaughter. That sounds pretty Neptunian to me. It's a
Yeah.
kind of an interesting thing. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then
Well, I
that
think.
Libra, the ruling planet being Virgo brings us right to that little gathering of planets there in Virgo right at the top of the chart.
Yeah, so Venus and Virgo ruling the midheaven.
Right.
Yeah, I think that brings in a lot of other things. I think my mind wants to go into the moon in Aquarius as
Okay.
something that most just does a lot of different directions, but it seems like that we haven't talked about that. And I think to me, that seems like well, first of all, it's basic to astrology. You're going to want to know what moon sign the person has, right? But also
Right.
just understanding where it is and the placement and what are the stressors placed on that are going to tell you a lot about the person, how they grew up, and what their direction is. Moon in Aquarius is going to be this need to be socially unusual, to be different, to have some kind of impact.
Yeah.
In the third house, it means she's going to show up as pretty different in her environment.
Yeah. And in her thinking
Yeah,
and
and her
communicating.
Yeah, and at school. And she talks about feeling more accepted as a young child, when it was more acceptable for kids to kind of be all over the map. But as she got older, she struggled with being ostracized. But so all of those speaks to that. The third house is your immediate environment, your early schooling, the way you communicate, your mindset, and having this vulnerability of the moon, and that's going to bring that into prominence.
Yeah, you think about that moon in Aquarius in the third, the unusual mind, and the necessity with the moon in Aquarius to be socially significant with that unusual mind. I mean, it's not like she could set aside her unusual mind and find a way to be useful. She had to, that was what needed to come to the table to be used to be socially significant. Huh.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
And as what Laurie's pointing out here with this red line is just that moon is under a lot of pressure. There's a lot of developmental pressure and tension on the moon. So it was a lot of like something needed to happen. And in this case, with Saturn opposed and Pluto opposed, something needed to happen that was going to help her have discipline, have structure in her life, and also empower her if she was going to succeed. And we've been talking a lot about the influence of her mother. Her mother basically was like, all right, my child has needs, and got to work and enrolled her in all kinds of different things, had her basically working on different things at age 4, was kind of no nonsense. And that is, it seems like that's exactly what she needed, though. I mean, it was, and also has led to her in her later years figuring out how to offer all kinds of really good advice about how to work with autistic children. And some of it is based on this idea, like how to offer a lot more structure, and that how things like manners and social skills can be taught and learned. It's pretty cool. She's having a pretty good impact.
Yeah, she really is having a huge impact. It's so interesting because as a child, she was, she grew up around the cattle industry or whatever. So she was exposed to that. And that's where her work really developed. But yeah, like you said, now as an older woman, she's really making a huge, huge difference in our understanding of the autistic mind. What a wonderful thing. And I think another person, her mother was a force to be reckoned with. And if she had been, a different person, that might have been really hard for her, but she really worked with it. And that structure and power dynamic that her mother kind of pressured her into really built her. She used that to build herself up and take on the mantle of the work she had to do. That's really lovely.
Yeah. So, lots of places we could go from here.
Let's talk about Virgo.
Okay.
Look at that little pack of Virgo planets. Some people would call that a stellium. I'm not going to call it a stellium because Mercury and Venus and the sun never are very far away from each other.
Agreed.
They're always close. And when they come together, it's clearly a focus. Obviously you look at this chart and you see that little focus of planets, and it is in the 10th house, which is, part of the story of what we're going to know her for. But I love looking at that and thinking about the titles to some of her books. I love the children's book she wrote called Manners Matter. I just think of Virgo with the needing to be the refinement of Virgo, that importance of dotting your I's and crossing your T's and setting things up neat and tidy, and the importance of that.
Yeah, I think Virgo also has a strong signification with animals. I think it's there's a sort of a stewardship aspect to it, and I think that part was interesting. That kind of caught my eye, and also that little grouping of Virgo planets does have a nice aspect to Mars. So it helps. In other words, all that's saying is, and the ability to take action on her Virgo ideas and her attention to detail. It just brings that in the simplest way.
Yeah, and I really like the combination in a chart when you see a strong Aquarius and a strong Virgo, because the Aquarius, with the moon in Aquarius, it is a need to be socially significant in some unusual manner. And then the sun in Virgo is the energy to be of service. So you bring those two together, and this person is going to make a big difference in the world. I love Virgo, and I probably have said it a million times on all of these videos. I think it's my favorite sign. I love Virgo. It's just, there's a kindness in it, there's a requirement with a strong Virgo to perfect something, to work, put the work and the effort in to perfect something in the life, and not for, so everybody will clap for them, but for the service of others. And I think she's a great example of that. And the kindness, the kindness of Virgo, it's not touchy-feely kindness. It's practical reality kindness.
Yeah, and that's very much a focus of her educational things that she's doing with children, is to provide structure, is to help autistic children in that way and teach them these things that are learnable. So very, very practical. And where do you think the autism shows up in this chart, Laurie?
Oh, well,
we had a little conversation about it, but
I know, and I can't remember what I was saying before about that, because I did have some idea. There was a few things. One thing you brought up was the fact that Uranus is unaspected. And that kind of, it just, that Uranus rules that Aquarius moon. So there's that detachment. There's sort of a detachment there.
Removed from so-called normal society somehow, or removed, or from groups in some way.
What was the other piece that I was thinking about?
Well, I think you were mentioning just that, what we've already touched on, which is the Saturn-Pluto opposition to the moon. And I mean, and we were just talking about the moon in general, like being in the third house and being in Aquarius, is just kind of separates it somehow from its environs immediately.
Yeah, and I think there was also something, I mean, clearly it's a combination of a bunch of things. But one thing that kept kind of jumping out at me is this sort of, that gathering of Virgo planets there doesn't have a lot of outlets. It has that little sextile to Mars in Cancer. Mars in Cancer is not very strong. It wants to take action, but it doesn't have a lot of strength to do so. And there's not a lot of fire in this chart. There is that Saturn in Leo, which definitely supports, I think, the mother's insistence on all that hard work really pushed her. Because that Mars in Cancer isn't going to give a whole lot of push, is it?
No, but it does square the midheaven and Neptune. It's a little loose on the midheaven, but it definitely, but I was thinking with the Neptune Mars square, it kind of brings in a little more of her charisma, which you do see when you watch her videos. She does capture the audience, like she holds people's attention. So some of that So that's just
that's true.
no, but I don't know if
Oh.
that kind of helps bring that Mars out into the profession or forces it out, because it's in a tough placement in the 8th house, and Cancer squaring Neptune. Like, those are all things which kind of beleaguer it. Yet maybe the giving of herself over to service is what, releases it. I mean, in the sextile to the sun,
to the sun.
release.
Yeah, that allows it a little space to function. And this is probably, some of her being bullied as a teenager, and that probably was part of that as well.
Yeah. So
interesting. I want to mention, because I think we were talking about this earlier, the nodal axis, from that hidden intensity of, killing cattle to the creating educational opportunities of comfort for children with autism. She kind of had to learn a lot from that work with the cattle in order to move into this other space that's so much more her real work, real work in the world. Yes, she helped cattle be more comfortable, and in doing so probably gave meat eaters much healthier meat to eat.
Yeah.
But
sure.
At the same time, her real purpose of the work that she's doing in the world here in 2021 is around teaching people how to help autistic kids thrive in this environment. She's got a lot to teach about that. And there's such tremendous numbers of children on that spectrum.
Yeah.
And she's lived with it a long time. And there's not a lot of people. There's not a lot of people of her age that are known to have autism that are such an example.
Yeah, she's rare. I mean, she's amazing.
She's rare because of that mother.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. Also, too, I just think there is a little bit of an emphasis on her 12th house, with the 12th house being the place of, I don't know, contemplating suffering, understanding suffering. And I think that both of her professions that she's had in working with cattle and then with children are about dealing with other people's suffering and looking at that. And I'm saying this because she's got Jupiter in Scorpio, which is kind of a woman with a mission, kind of a setup.
And it rules her ascendant.
Yeah, it rules the ascendant, and it also squares the moon and Saturn, Pluto. So it kind of creates a T-square, which really is just creating an incredibly dynamic configuration, which is a way that forces her to move. It's forced her through her life to get going and do something with it. And also Jupiter is it can be different things, but generally speaking, it's a pretty beneficial planet. So it's creating stress, but it's also creating opportunity. Right. So it's a pretty cool Jupiter and Scorpio. I like that.
Yeah, I like it too. And I also think it's really interesting that Jupiter ruling her ascendant, and she's a professor. I mean, that's such a Jupiter thing.
That's a really good point. Totally.
Yeah. Here she is, she's come a long ways. She's done an incredible job with her life. She's really done well. I want to watch some more things about her.
Yeah. I think she really lives the archetypes of Virgo and Aquarius very well, especially the Virgo. I mean, and since we're in Virgo season, it's a perfect time to talk about her chart, her contribution, the meaning that she's made in her life. And really just the Mercury in Virgo is a very powerful little chip on its own in this chart. It's in its own sign, and I think it's the final dispositor of the chart. That means if you follow things along through rulerships, you end up discovering that Mercury is where everything ends up. Everything lands Mercury, Virgo. So what this suggests is a person who it really is about the mindset and getting to work and studying hard and basically just doing the work. So
And it's really interesting. Well, one thing, let me see, I want to clear all that. Right now, Saturn is conjunct her moon. Uranus is square it. So, this whole configuration of that moon and Scorpio and Pluto, that T square that you just mentioned, is really under a lot of pressure right now. It would be really interesting to see how her work progresses over, the next 5 years or whatever. These books that she's written, some really awesome, cool books for kids. I just actually ordered a few for my granddaughter because they just look like amazing books that she's writing for kids in that age, 9 to 12 or something like that, for that age group of kids. And yeah, so she's doing some interesting things. And I think with this Uranus Saturn square in 2021, I think, yeah, watch her. I think we'll see more growth in the work that she's doing.
yeah, awesome. That's great.
Okay. Anything
Okay.
else before we close up?
No, I think we hit a lot of things, and if anyone has questions, I hope that they will email us with any questions or post a comment somewhere.
Yeah. So, well, thank you, Jenny. This has been super fun.
Thank you.
And I love looking at interesting people's charts with you. It's super fun.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for inviting me along, and look forward to doing more with you.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to find you and get a consultation with you, how are they going to track you down?
You're going to go to hiddenpathastrology.com. You can also find me on Facebook and also on Instagram.
All right. So. And you can find me at astrolore.org or also on Instagram, Facebook, etc. So thank you, everybody, and have fun with your studies and be well.
Nice. Thank you.
Bye-bye.